and here today we're going to be talking about a very important topic of trauma in our personal lives. We have an individual, Karen Bashford, who has gone through personal trauma, and is going to share her story and tell you about some of the advice that she can pass on to you. So Karen, thank you for joining us today. So tell us a bit about your background and how you sort of help people.
Okay, well, my background is as a soul growth therapist, coach and mentor for women, although I do work with men, who basically aren't living, just surviving. And they know they want more, but don't seem to be able to make it happen.
Interesting.
And my background is very much about trauma in childhood. Abuse and trauma in my relationships, and ill health caused by that abuse and trauma, and loss of my home and being homeless as well because of abuse and trauma.
Goodness me, that is a lot of trauma from childhood up to adulthood, and loss of home and a whole variety of things. But tell me a bit about early trauma in childhood.
Okay, my parents, even now, have not been able to tell me they love me or physically hug me. If I want to hug my mother, I will hug a wooden board. She finds it exceedingly hard to be hugged. If I say I love you, I would usually get back, and you. She finds it exceedingly hard to even express the words I love you. According to the NSPC, National Society for Protection of Children, that is classed as neglect. It's emotional neglect. And we do not realize how much, as a human being, we need to have that sense of touch from our parents, that holding and affirmations of love. It is a fundamental need of a human being.
So true. Is it a different generation, this the way of holding back emotion, strong upper chin, as it were? So what do you think this is?
It's generational. If you look back through time, you will notice that even in Victorian times, children were not with their parents unless they were poor children, and obviously that's a different story. But the more middle upper class, children were separated from their parents. More often than not, it was a case of we weren't aware that how important touch and expressions of love were. It's only since we've started realizing how important it is that generations have altered and changed and started to do so. We see it now, how often children are told they're loved, how often they're held and sort of cuddled and things like that. So it's very much generational, and it goes back probably centuries, if not back to millennium time, beginning of time.
That's interesting because in terms of nature, making sure that there's a bond between the infant, that connection early on. Same with in human beings. If that is lacking, that bond is never been formed, has it?
Yeah.
And if it continues, what do you think the impact of that is? Is not getting that touch, that emotional connection and love.
It can cause ill health. It certainly can cause lack of belief in self, trust in self. Certainly not good enough. I don't deserve to be loved. So why would anyone want to love me? Why would anyone like me even? There's so much self-doubt around not being held and told you're loved.
And were you only child, or was it other members of the family?
No. I had an older brother, or I have an older brother and a younger sister. I was the middle child, and I was a loner, very much. Even before my sister came along, there's an 8-year difference between us. I was a loner, and I've always been a loner. But
And
that's partly due to the nature of my relationship with my parents, but also partly because of who I am.
so as you grew up through your teens, and you started becoming a young adult, how is that sort of affecting you on a day-to-day basis? This lack of support or love from your family.
I had very, very few friends. I would spend an awful lot of time reading in my own room. Very little involvement in the family. We would do things together, but it was like I was always separate from them because I never sensed that I was wanted necessarily. It's a strange feeling. And I still trying to figure out what I really felt at the time. But yeah, it's like it's isolation, separation.
Mm. And that's obviously tough for any child to go through that. How did you sort of deal with that? Did you have, if you decided you didn't have many friends, I mean, who could you talk to about that?
I didn't. It wasn't until I was 50 that I even realised my parents had not told me they loved me or hugged me, despite going out networking for my business. And every time I saw somebody, it was like, let's have a hug. So I literally, once I was in my own business or even working, I tended to go to people that I knew were huggers, simply because I needed that human touch.
So you're sort of making up for 50 years of no
Yeah.
hugs and love.
Yeah.
So are you finding there's people out there that are willing to share and genuine love and affection and hugs?
Yeah. I'm quite isolated where I am at the moment, and that's a homeless story that's been resolved. But yeah, I do seriously miss being able to just go to see friends and have those hugs, or even just going out and meeting new people. I invariably land up by the end of a conversation having a hug with somebody. I just seem to have it happen. And maybe that's the vibration I'm putting out, that I want to be hugged.
So you're out there hugging people in business and random people in the street. You're doing a hugathon.
Not quite random people in the street, but yeah. Even a physical sort of hand on shoulder or something like that is appreciated because it's that human touch.
Mm-hmm. Indeed. If you take the example of a busy tube station, a London tube, everyone's on their phones, on newspapers, and we don't even look at each other. Their heads are down. So we've become these different type of humans. We term them human doings rather than human beings. And it's a difficult time for people just to communicate. We're on social media a lot, and that's not real communication, is it? It's a different type of, can't hug people online, can you? No. And we know that
No.
indeed lockdown and the impact of COVID and everything else that's changed people's behaviors. So tell me a bit about your trauma in later life, you sort of become an adult in relationships.
Well, I had 2 abusive relationships. My husband was emotionally abusive. I actually divorced him after 16 years of marriage. I was one of these that I'd committed, so I was going to see it out. Yeah. You have to recognize in that kind of relationship, it's probably never going to change. So it's recognizing that when you've had enough, or you realize you're worth more. And that's what happened in my relationship with my husband. I realized I was worth more. Unfortunately for me, when I started divorce proceedings, I lost my family, or rather I lost my family in the sense of my parents had to be isolated because my ex-husband went with my brother and sister-in-law rather than them come and look after me or support me. And that meant that I couldn't speak to my parents because they would potentially speak to my brother and sister-in-law, and my ex-husband would hear about it.
Oh dear, so there's a lot of isolation and
lots of isolation, and that happens a lot, unfortunately. Yeah.
So that's obviously really tough times for you then. What type of abuse are we talking about?
He would constantly complain about the state of the house, despite the fact I spent thousands of pounds and hours of doing it up, making it really nice. He would never do anything like that. He would be constantly losing the jobs he had because of his attitude and behaviour. He would be criticising. He was a qualified chef, and yet I never got a meal.
Amazing. So this mental abuse, this constant, berating you and things like that. I mean, how often do you think that happens in relationships?
It's surprisingly regular. It is surprisingly regular, but people don't recognise it. They just assume it's normal.
And does it go both ways in relationships? Have we come across?
Can be. It can be, but generally it's just usually one person and the other is constantly giving, because there's a fear in there that, if the relationship breaks down, what do I do? And for me, financially, I was the breadwinner all the time. And I knew that if I walked away, I could end up having to support him. And that took a lot of courage on my part to think that I would have to support this man that I can't stand for the rest of my life.
Oh, good. So in terms of your mental fortitude, and how did you get through those days and those months, if not years? What did you have to do to try and keep yourself together?
I disconnected from my emotions, probably because I'd never really connected with them due to the trauma from earlier years. It was a case of just get on. I wanted to live. I wanted to improve myself. I certainly started at that point of my divorce to explore personal development, understanding why things were happening to me in the way they were, why I kept repeating the same patterns with behaviours or financial struggles and such like. So that is probably the turning point for me of understanding who I was.
Right. So you got to a certain point in your life, and did you seek help and advice at the time, or did you keep it all into yourself?
No, but that's the nature of who I am. I tend to hibernate when I'm going through challenges, simply because I find it easier not to talk. But last year I went through a nervous breakdown. For the first probably 2 months, I kept very quiet about it. But then it was a case of recognizing that now I was ready to talk. And I reached out to some wonderful friends and said, I need some help, please. Just listen. And they were amazing. They just literally listened. And the people you have to find are those that are prepared to just listen. You don't want solutions. You just need to be listened to. Yeah, because heard.
A lot of people want to jump into solutions for you, for genuine reasons, and that. So really sorry to hear about sort of the breakdown. So for people to understand, what did that look like in your situation? What did that look like so people can recognize these in themselves?
It initially started with my body deciding that for 5 days I could not do anything. I literally come home from a walk and went straight to bed and didn't move for 5 days, basically, apart from the essential getting some water and going to the loo and things like that. And then I recovered from that. It was nearly 2 months it took to recover from that. It's like my body had just gone, can't deal with this anymore. It just built up and up and up, and it was like a massive explosion of no more. Got over that, and then in January of 2023, I woke up one morning and just couldn't stop crying. All the emotions of everything that had been building up over the years. I'd been my carer for my mother for 30 years, of which the last 16 years I was basically the sole person who saw her, who spoke to her every day. I didn't live with her. I didn't have to physically look after her, but emotionally I supported her. But I was getting no emotional support myself.
Right.
And your mind goes, enough. Your body goes, enough. And 2 months of crying.
Well, it looks like it's been building up for so many years. It's like a volcano, isn't it? Sort of eruption of emotions.
Yeah.
And this a lot of talk about body-mind connection. If your mind's affected, your body is going to be affected. How do you relate?
I'd reverse it. I would say there's a body-mind connection, not a mind-body connection. Your body gives you warning signs.
Mm-hmm.
My illnesses were my warning signs, but I chose to ignore them. So over time, it got to the point where my body went, not dealing with this anymore. Hence why I stopped totally, and hence why I had the nervous breakdown, because my body was going, don't want to deal with this anymore. You're not listening to me, so I'm going to make you listen to me. I'm going to make you deal with this.
That's so true. Because when I had my burnout and thought I was in a heart attack, chest pains, collapsing, rushed to hospital, body had said enough is enough. And it looks like in a situation like yours and the nervous breakdown, that your body's shouting out loud, telling you, something has to change. So tell me that journey and a bit about how you were helping people, sort of your experience, and sort of have we done training courses on it, or
Not at the moment. It's something I'm looking at doing, but at the moment I offer one-to-ones. They're intensive, simply because I believe that we are capable of healing ourselves. And my work very much involves understanding what you need, but then giving you the ability to actually do the work yourself. That does not involve talking.
Right.
It does not involve healing as such. This is very much going inwards and asking yourself the questions and accessing the answers and taking the actions those answers give you. But in 90 minutes, I will change somebody's life forever.
Fascinating. So what type of lives have you changed? I mean, without having to reveal any names, I mean, what are the challenges?
I've worked with a lady who's had clinical depression. She still gets depressed simply because of her life experience has been so dreadful that there's always going to be something that will trigger her, but she's no longer clinically depressed.
Yes.
I've helped heal somebody who's had MS, who literally spent most of the time in bed, unable to do anything. Within 3 months of working with me, she was cold water swimming.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
So where do these techniques come from? Is it learned through psychology, medical? Where does it all come from?
I am a qualified hypnotherapist, but I do not hypnotize anyone. There's no need to.
Okay.
You have the access to the information you need simply by going inwards and asking yourself certain questions, and that's what I facilitate. I'm a qualified NLP practitioner. I certainly use those tools within the work I do, but it's not my main focus. What happened was I was working with a young lady who had to present to a group of people, and she was incapable of doing so. As a hypnotherapist, this was, and she just would not allow herself to face the reality of what she had to deal with.
Yes.
And it was like I was sitting there thinking, well, what do I do now? I'm not getting anywhere with her. And I am psychic, and I get a lot of messages coming through. And it was like, just take her to meet her inner child. Okay, fine. Let's do that. Hence why you can probably see the painting behind me of the child within the child, or the child within the adult. And it was a case of I literally took her to meet her inner child, and it changed everything. She sat for 3 hours listening to angelic music in my house.
I see.
She walked out of there with a totally different attitude to her life.
Wonderful. So you've definitely helped that individual. So you're doing some amazing work to impact people's lives and get through trauma. So is there any, you said talk about the questions. Are you able to share any questions now, or is that mainly for the time you have with them? Asking inner questions of yourself.
The ones that I always find helpful, and usually it's best to do this just before you go to bed.
Okay.
because your mind is quiet. And the questions that are just generic questions that anyone can ask themselves without necessarily even having been through known trauma or abuse or anything like that is, what do I need to know? Using the word what opens you up to accessing anything that you need to know. And that can come from within. It can come from other people, simply because somebody will suddenly have a conversation with you and it makes things clear. Or it can come from a higher source, energy, universe, whatever you want to call it. It can come through that. But that is a brilliant question to ask just before you go to bed. And don't even attempt to think about it. This is not about thinking. This is just simply asking the question and letting it go. Releasing any attachment to getting the answers. And just wait and see what happens.
Fascinating. Yes, I'll try that this evening. So you're obviously doing some wonderful work out there to support individuals going through trauma. How do people get hold of you? If you could tell us what's the best way to get hold of you.
Well, you can certainly get hold of me from my website. It's karenbashford.com. There is an actual contact form on there that you can fill in and ask for an appointment with me. I give 30-minute calls where we can just sit and discuss. Obviously, I will share how I work and whether it's something you'd want to do with me. You can connect with me on LinkedIn as Karen Bashford, Empower You. There is also my Facebook or my LinkedIn or Twitter accounts as well that you can connect with me.
Fabulous. Well, Karen Bashford, thank you so much for sharing your story. I'm sure it can't be easy, but it gives the world power to share your story and to know that there's other people out there who've gone through the same thing, that they can come to you to seek advice and support to get through that trauma and become a better person as a result. It's been wonderful speaking with you, and enjoy the rest of your day. I'm sure people will be in touch. Take care.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your time, and thank you for speaking with me.